At Construct, a social enterprise by Blue Door, we believe that the right opportunity can open doors to employment, stability, and a stronger future. Developed by Blue Door's award-winning program, the Construct Canada portal is a flexible, online learning platform designed to complement and expand existing programming, with access to a robust content library of curated courses. The growing library of courses are designed to support professional and personal development, featuring course topics such as mental health, employability skills, financial literacy, and more. Organizations can choose from a range of learning modules and combine them into flexible packages that support their goals. Whether supporting job seekers, students, employees, or community members, the Construct Canada portal makes it simple to deliver meaningful, accessible training. To learn more, visit constructgta.ca to connect with a team member and schedule your demo call to explore how the Construct Canada portal can support your community.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to On the Way Home, the podcast where we explore the people, perspectives, and solutions shaping the future of housing and homelessness across Canada. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly. Today, I'm joined by Sheldon Polett, Executive Director of Raising the Roof and a respected leader who has spent more than 3 decades working in housing and nonprofit leadership across the country. From his early work with Choices for Youth in St. John's to national leadership roles advancing solutions to homelessness, Sheldon brings a deep, long-term perspective on how Canada's housing challenges have evolved and what this moment demands from all of us. Let's jump in. Welcome back to On the Way Home, Sheldon. So lucky to have you here with us again.
Always a treat to talk to my good friends at Blue Door.
Sheldon, can we begin by asking you, what does home mean to you? And of course, if anything has changed since the last time you answered that question or adapted as you continue to work in the space, please do share.
Not a problem. And I did give some thought of not repeating myself with that question. And one of the things actually I've legitimately been thinking about a lot lately is we celebrate in this work resiliency all the time. And I've seen over 30 years so much resiliency in such situations. To be honest, I don't know if I would have the capacity for that level of resiliency. I'd like to think I would, but I don't take it for granted that I would. So I've been thinking about resiliency, and we always do and should celebrate it. But I just thought, home. Well, it would be nice to have a space where you didn't have to be in a constant state of resiliency. Because what's on the other side of that resiliency? You know, I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight. I don't know where my next meal is coming from. I don't feel safe. You know, the constant threat of violence and all the other pieces. It would be nice to have a place where, you know what, I could close my door and I don't have to be on that state of high alert and resiliency all the time. It's just a bit of a twist on that concept of, again, something we do and should celebrate all the time. But I would imagine for people like trying to think about what it would feel like to have to always be on guard in that way. And it's exhausting, you know, and poor for your mental health and all other aspects of your life as well. So I've been reflecting on, well, home is really, you don't have to always be on high alert in that way. So that's kind of my today's reflection on what home means to me.
I love that reflection, and it actually reminds me of a couple summers ago when I went out portaging with family, and it really felt like a very calming experience. You burn lots of energy, you're just out there in nature, and then I thought to myself, like, at what point would this feeling shift? Like for someone experiencing homelessness, like you don't, and it is really about the ability to choose, you know. And when you're talking about resilience, if you choose to be out there for a certain amount of time and brave the wind and the rains and the thunder and, you know, hiking for miles and whatever, and then some people don't have a choice and are exposed to those circumstances all the time. So I love that you raised that in the context of resilience. You've spent over 30 years in nonprofit leadership and housing, from Choices for Youth, where I first met you in St. John's, to now leading Raising the Roof nationally across Canada. How does today's housing crisis compare to what you've seen over the decades of your work, and what feels fundamentally different right now?
I think, for me, over that time frame of 30 years, 30 years ago, certainly me as an individual, young leader, yes, saw the need, saw the challenge, saw the consequences of not providing the solutions that people need and the supports that go along with it. But part of it was not necessarily knowing what the solutions were. I think at this juncture, and even probably back then, but certainly now, we know what the solutions are. We know what works. The counterpoint to that is we know pretty concisely what doesn't work, and it's a choice between setting people up to succeed versus setting them up to fail. So I think about it from that perspective. I think one of the biggest challenges is the notion that despite the fact that we've got a really solid handle in other countries, leading by example like Finland, of what works, that sustained planning and commitment to providing the solutions in the long run. I think part of that, what makes the work difficult sometimes, is we know what the solutions are, but we're still not achieving them. That we're still leaving people in precarious situations, that we're still kind of having, entire communities struggle because we're unable to make the investments for the long term that are required in many instances. So I think from that perspective, it may not be the spirit of your question, but like that is kind of a reflection over the last 30 years in terms of how things have changed, that we actually do have a better line of sight on what the solutions are. I think in lots of ways, when people think of today's crisis, the encampments, I think in lots of ways for many of us who are working in the field, well, we knew that was coming. We knew, there was only a matter of time before it became much more visible. But the truth is, we've been struggling in a housing crisis and a homelessness crisis for quite some time. One of the things I talked about on an interview recently with another colleague was in and around people think, oh, well, when did this happen? Well, COVID or right before COVID or right after COVID? No, this has been coming our way for many, many years. Here in my community, one of the stories I told was over 15 years ago, we brought some folks from a city in the States. They worked for a health department, and they had figured out 15 or 20 years ago that the best health outcomes they could achieve was for the health department in that city to get involved in the development and operation of affordable housing. Well, that was 15, 20 years ago. And we're still here trying to figure out how to implement what they knew back then. So again, connecting to my earlier point around that is very frustrating. But I think that's the piece of it for me in terms of where the crisis is now. And it will continue to head in this direction until we grapple with, what truly are not just the long-term solutions, but the long-term investments that are required to get ahead of what is a growing crisis at this stage in our country.
And from your vantage point at Raising the Roof, what are you seeing across Canada right now in terms of housing insecurity and homelessness? Which communities are being hit the hardest in this moment?
Well, I think in lots of ways, it's go to the obvious, the larger urban centers, which is primarily, not primarily, I suppose, but to a large extent, folks coming from smaller communities in search of support, because not only do their needs around housing are reflected in smaller communities as well as larger urban centers, but when you see people struggling with getting access to housing and or supports, they're naturally going to gravitate to larger urban centers. And we see this on youth homelessness and all aspects of homelessness as well. But one of the things I was struck by, I think it was probably one of the first times, I think it was Gregor Robinson spoke at the Canadian Alliance in Homelessness Conference recently, I think in the fall, where he openly talked about like housing and homelessness crisis is no longer a large urban center issue anymore, that every community across the country is facing issues in and around how to meet the needs of people who are experiencing homelessness and certainly housing instability. I think in my view, that is a very accurate description. We've known for a long time the dynamics play out at scale differently, but in the same way in those communities. I think I often reflect, well, then we need to make sure the solutions are showing up in not just urban centers, but smaller communities as well.
And I'm hoping on the bright side that you can now share with us what Raising the Roof is doing at this point in our history, the impact you're having, any exciting initiatives that you're undertaking. let us know.
I'm happy to share. Well, one of our most exciting projects that's very current and very close to being finished, we're working on a redevelopment of a derelict building in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is a community certainly that's embraced us with open arms in terms of playing a role in providing housing solutions in that community. The need is great, like many communities across the country. So it's 23 units of deeply affordable, supportive housing for folks exiting homelessness in that city. Absolutely amazing opportunity, absolutely, wonderful community spirit. Fantastic support from the provincial government and other partners in Winnipeg to make that project come to life as well, including our social enterprise partners Build and Purpose in Winnipeg. We believe in the spirit of, if we're going to develop housing for folks, let's magnify the benefits that come from that by working as much as possible with social enterprise partners to create training and employment opportunities for some of the same people who need long-term, safe, affordable housing. So really excited by that project. It is a testament of what's possible when community, government come together. I'm a big believer in community-led and government supported, to be really honest. I think that's the right mix of how we, achieve the kind of solutions nationally that we need. On the bigger scale, we are very excited to have just submitted a very large portfolio submission to Build Canada Homes, reflecting projects in not just Manitoba, throughout Ontario, and now Newfoundland and Labrador, which is my home province. So that's an amazing opportunity, but it really highlights what's possible through a spirit of our partnership as well, because those projects in that portfolio in those three provinces are reflective of not just housing units that are being developed by Raising the Roof. It is also projects of our partners that we're providing support to. Part of our mantra at Raising the Roof these days is, if I build a home as Raising the Roof, the benefit is someone's getting the set of keys of a long-term, stable, affordable home in short order. But if I help you, Emmy, develop housing, guess what? Someone is still getting access to the affordable housing that they need. So it checks both boxes, whether we develop a house or we help someone else do it. So that portfolio, again, across at the moment 3 provinces, includes both Raising the Roof projects and projects that we're providing support to as well. So it's really exciting. It's a big, bold vision. And we're optimistic. We've got support provincially for that submission as well. So we're excited for the next stage of the dialogue with Build Canada Homes.
So is the support you're providing it's basically like a partnership and submitting for a number of units together, or do you provide like the pre-development support?
Yes. Yeah, so for the projects of our own, obviously we're doing the pre-development and development work. We're project managing, making sure the housing gets developed on time, on code, on budget, as they say. And again, through engagement with our social enterprise partners as much as possible. But we also then partners who need a lot of the same supports and services. What we've heard across the country, and certainly in my home province would be the same, is, community groups, sometimes faith groups, sometimes municipalities even. They have an opportunity, certainly have a need. They might have a piece of land, they might have a building. What they don't necessarily have is the capacity to take a project through all the hoops and loops that we know is required to develop affordable housing. So that's where, by request, we're happy to lend our support as well. So that would be kind of the bulk of those partner-owned projects. We're lending our expertise and our support. I've often said there's not enough time, energy, or money in this country for us all to kind of be charting our own individual path around what we're trying to achieve. So much more can be achieved through, true partnership and collaboration.
100%. Are you able to tease for the listeners how many units would be achieved if you were able to get support for this work right now?
So right now, depending on which number you look at, because of course there's a number of units that we are strongly positioning as shovel ready. There's a number of units that we could have shovel ready up to a year. And then there's a bunch of units also that, 1 to 2 year time frame. So I think somewhere around a little over 1,000 units is what's in that first 2 tranches of projects, of anywhere from shovel ready now to shovel ready within a year. That's a really good number. It's nowhere near what we need in the country. But I think it is a good symbol of what's possible from a nonprofit, community-led perspective. And I think that number could grow over time as well.
How many has Raising the Roof already done?
So right now, we just acquired our third successful MIRA project. For those who don't know, that's the multi-unit residential acquisition program in Toronto. Highly successful program around the preservation of existing affordable housing. So right now, I think we're around 155, 160 units of our own housing under operation. We're going to open up more units in Winnipeg. And then, of course, through the development of the portfolio submission that we've just submitted to Build Canada Homes, that number is really going to start to accelerate. And we're really excited by that. But we're big believers in doing it really in a really sustainable way. I often talk to staff and they're totally on board. The minute we started housing one person, comes with a different level of responsibility of getting this right for the long term.
100%. So how do you manage operations with like existing charities and nonprofits once the unit is established?
Oh, absolutely. So again, going back to my comment about not enough time, energy, or money, if Raising the Roof, for example, had to try and staff up all over the country to provide supports and do all the other pieces, that would take a lot of time and energy and quite frankly, resources we don't have. So the partnership model for us is if we open up these new units in Winnipeg, for example, hopefully in a month's time, then we have a property management partner who's on board and knows the community resources and needs really well. We have support provision because this is also not only deeply affordable, but also a supportive housing operation. So with wonderful support from our community and the Manitoba government, we also have a partnership with folks, Main Street in particular, on the ground in Winnipeg, who will provide support to tenants, which is really important because, you know, they're the folks on the ground. They know the community well established. So they know the needs, the resources, they know that community. What a wonderful use of partnership to kind of make sure that those folks are reflecting the local needs at the same time. So that's just one example, but all of our housing is some combination of partnership around the operation and certainly delivery of supports.
And we're going to pivot into some of your other work in a minute. But before we do, I did want to ask you for organizations who might wish to be part of a broader coalition in Canada. Do you just reach out to Raising the Roof or do you guys hand select, or how does it go? Or do you have to be a social enterprise?
Well, it's really interesting, and certainly social enterprises, we're always open to hearing folks. We may or may not have a project in your community, but the more social enterprises on our radar, the more we're able to pick up the phone when opportunities arise. So certainly to date, it's really been just showing up. You know, we obviously attend CHRA on a regular basis, Canadian Housing Renewal Association Congress, which is in Newfoundland and Labrador this year in April. Really excited about that. The Canadian Alliance and Homelessness Conference obviously is another big one for us. And it's just through organic dialogue with folks. When people learn what we do and how we do it, it's really attractive. You know, we're a value-aligned charity, nonprofit organization that people, I think, again, feel value aligned around our organizations. And it's really word of mouth in terms of who we are and what we do and why we do it. That seems to attract folks. That's really been this organic approach to developing that piece of our work. It's really interesting because one of the reasons why we were able to accelerate and get a portfolio together for Build Canada Homes is that work was already taking place. The partnership model, the word of mouth stuff around, hey, can you help us develop affordable housing, was already happening. So when the portfolio focus of Build Canada Homes became very apparent, it was just taking that body of work and amalgamating it into what is now a submission for Build Canada Homes. So that's the beauty of it as well, is we didn't have to go sit in a room and figure out how to come up with a portfolio. We were already doing that, which is absolutely amazing. So again, creates what we feel is a very strong opportunity.
Very exciting. And maybe we'll go a bit to your work in youth homelessness previously through Choices for Youth and nationally with Away Home Canada. Would you share with us any perspectives how youth homelessness has changed in the past few years and where we can improve and how we support our youth?
I think if you look at the conversation about youth homelessness, and this goes back a ways because, I've been at this a long time, No one in the country 25 years ago, when the conversation really started to emerge around youth homelessness, it wasn't on the radar, period. You couldn't go to a national conference and have a session, or even let alone multiple sessions on youth homelessness. So a number of us got together and said, that's unacceptable, because we know youth homelessness is a significant issue in the country even 25 years ago. So again, doing the work over many, many years and leading up to Away Home Canada, which is a national coalition to end youth homelessness, is that body of work has really accelerated and moved, as we all know. So not just on the radar now, nationally, internationally, it is a large part of the conversation around how to prevent and homelessness in general, in terms of stopping the flow of young people into homelessness and getting them out of it as quickly as we can when they do, always compared to the emergency room. Someone's always going to break their leg in the middle of the night, but that cannot be your major health intervention for everything. So youth homelessness is the same in terms of prevention of young people ending up in harm's way to begin with. So then it becomes about, an array of housing solutions, because not every young person wants or is able to choose, one standard type of housing. So you need an array of housing models, from intensive supports to light touch, some congregate, some scattered site, and so on and so forth, really building out an array of choices for folks to fit into, because that's what's going to determine long-term success, that people have the right to choose and the supports and the housing that fits their needs the best. The other side of it is, I'm very happy to see that, the shift towards really focusing on prevention long-term. So how do youth serving systems, play a role in solving for youth homelessness? Well, getting in and working more collaboratively with school systems through the upstream model, which is the model out of Australia that started as the Geelong project, for example. But going in and identifying youth earlier around risk of leaving school, because guess what? All the factors that would contribute to a young person disengaging from the school system are the exact same factors and are pre-indicators of young people who would then potentially be homeless down the road. So getting in, identifying those kids earlier, and providing supports not just for them and what's going on in school, but also to the highest degree possible, following them home and supporting the family unit. If there's an issue of poverty, if there's an issue of mental health, if there's an issue of housing instability in the home, solving for that is the best way to create the conditions for a young person to continue to engage in school. If they're continuing to engage in school, it also reduces the risk that they will end up homeless later on. So models like that, the family and natural supports work that Away Home Canada is doing as well. So you look at issues around the school system, again, the child welfare system. Many, many people in those systems that care about young people just as much as I do, to be really clear. But as systems, they've been functioning in crisis for so long, it is difficult sometimes for that crisis to shift to prevention-based strategies. So I think there's a lot of work left ahead of us, but I think the conversation has really shifted and accelerated around, okay, well, what are the longer-term solutions to meet the needs of not just youth, but vulnerable families in a completely different way, to prevent the occurrence of homelessness or the risk of homelessness in the first place. So I'm really excited about a lot of that work. I think there's a lot to be done around youth mental health that's connecting into this work as well. So if you look at integrated youth service models, which is really focused on youth mental health, but guess what? It goes right alongside housing support and stability at the same time. Because if you have a young person, they may be getting what they need around their youth mental health needs, but if they're still at risk of homelessness, guess what? There's only so far you can go with that young person being able to manage their mental health, and vice versa. So looking at the connection points between youth mental health work and youth homelessness as well. It's really bringing conversations together as much as possible.
Amazing. And you touched on policy and systems as well, which moves slowly, but the housing crises move fast. What, from your experience engaging governments, what are municipalities, provinces, and the federal government getting right, and how can we continue to improve as a nation right now?
So I think in lots of ways that, there are instances where, policy is shifting in the right way. I think one of the challenges is it tends to feel like a bit of a hodgepodge where, you have an opportunity in time because the right, policy view is in government right now. Well, then that 4 years later can shift dramatically. So the challenge often is around how do we have long-term thinking based on, 4 year or even sometimes less, election cycles. That continues to be an issue. Again, referring back to our good friends in Finland around, what they've been able to achieve from a substantial reduction in homelessness and housing and increasing housing stability. When you look at it, it's like they didn't discover some magic wand. They didn't like, oh, some secret sauce that no one's ever thought of before. No. And there are some unique pieces, certainly. What they had was long-term planning that everyone came around the table and said, from all kinds of, my understanding, from all political divides, large urban centers, small urban centers, those sorts of things, all coming around the table and making that long-term 10+ year investment. That kind of sustained effort that is required to really make a difference when it comes to all forms of homelessness, youth homelessness, and homelessness for older adults as well. So I think that is where my brain goes when you ask me that question. I mean, there are examples of people who are at a municipal level creating the right conditions for housing development to accelerate. There are examples of policy shifts where you're meeting the needs of populations in a more appropriate way. One of the things in Manitoba, give them a huge shout out. The Manitoba government came out with a call for proposals for capital for affordable housing development, but they concurrently released an RFP for supports. You don't see that all the time, right? Often it's, yes, you have access to a capital pot here, but it's, good luck finding where the support resources are going to come from. So they had the wisdom of releasing that RFP at the same time. And as a result, we have a 23 units of affordable housing about to come online that already has baked into it the appropriate supports to work with people who also need supports, not just affordable housing. So there are lots of examples like that. But I think there's not enough of them that are across the country, I would say, in terms of, that's a sweet spot with Manitoba right now. I hope it lasts a very long time. But can I find that in Newfoundland? Can I find that in Ontario? Maybe yes, maybe no. So that's often the struggle, trying to do things at a national scale, where it's a consistency of that approach. One of the things we often think about is, there is a mix between getting the capital right. I mean, for people who are in the development world, your ability to hit deeply affordable is subject to, well, then, what does your capital stack look like? Do you have X amount of dollars of funding? Do you, how much financing do you need? So your ability to make it deeply affordable is driven by, the cost of, what that capital requirement is. On the other side of it is everyone wants to house people with high acuity, as we should. There's a big focus. But the challenge is being asked to do it without the appropriate support resources at the same time. I would argue the challenge with that is you're potentially setting people up to fail because you already know you don't have the support required to meet their needs. It sets individuals up to fail, first and foremost. It sets organizations up to fail. And in some regard, it sets communities up to fail as well. So it's really important to get that mix right around affordability and supports.
Agreed. To make it sustainable also, right? Like that housing stability is so important. Mm-hmm. You've helped to build coalitions and learning communities across the country. What does effective collaboration look like when nonprofits, governments, and the private sector actually work together on housing? And what usually gets in the way?
Yeah. I think I'm going to start in a place that may sound not as tangible as I know it is like value aligned. Right. You and I, Emmy, have known each other a long time. And I think, you can tell really quickly, around that value alignment, around, do you see the world the same way? Do you see partnership in the same way? The portfolio submission, for example, that we just made, kind of the motto is a win for one is a win for all of us. Yes, we all have our individual projects and we have our individual advocacy, but, kind of preaching and living up to it around like whoever wins in this scenario in terms of, a project going forward is truly a win for everyone. And that is a very tangible thing. It might not sound like it, but it is very tangible when you're dealing with a partner who feels and can articulate that. So that is, I think, first and foremost. What are the common goals that you want to achieve? Then you get into the work of, okay, well, what does this begin to look like? I come from a history of, back in the day, partnership sometimes was, here's a piece of paper, I support you, and you return the piece of paper, and then we go our separate ways. It can't be that form of partnership. I understand why people sometimes do that, just generally supporting each other. But where it's at for us right now, raising the roof does not work flat out without tangible, meaningful partnership where, we play a role, our partners are playing a role, our social enterprise partners are playing a role. Collectively, we can achieve a hell of a lot more, really honest. But it has to be very tangible in terms of what that partnership looks like and feels like. So those are some of the, key ingredients, I would argue. In terms of building coalitions, again, a lot of those same elements are required. The story of Away Home Canada, I go back there, is sort of, we originally had a conversation around a table that looked at, well, we wanted to change the world one day. Day 2 of the session that we had, I've told this story many times, but it's been a while, was, oh my God, we all have jobs to go back to. We're really busy and we can't change the world tomorrow. So it's like, let's not start there. So we worked for the better part of 5 or 6 years. And then when we had the capacity collectively, then we said, okay, now let's turn our attention. And Away Home was born out of that kind of conversation as well. But it started with the original vision. It started with the original value alignment, and then a really solid, realistic understanding of what it was going to take to get there, and not getting ahead of ourselves at the same time. So that's a great example of what's possible when the right group of people, that, more people joined along the way, to be really clear what's possible from now in an international agenda perspective when you have the right combination of people around a common vision.
I love what you said about the getting together, let's go and change the world tomorrow, because there is so much passion in this space. Obviously, people are in the space because they have a heart. They love what they do. They want to change the world. And so I think the sector also takes on a lot. And to that point, I think that there is, there has been burnout. And I wanted to ask you how you think leaders and organizations that serve on the front line can sustain this work long term without losing people to exhaustion.
Yeah, I mean, I think to start at it where it really matters in terms of, the people facing side of this, certainly coming from, a lot of work over many years where, like, you're trying to support staff who are in the trenches, they're working at shelters, they're working in outreach centers. And yes, they're dealing with a lot, but primarily the issue is not the work, is you're absorbing a lot of vicarious trauma. Like, you're seeing a side of the world that, like, most people really struggle to comprehend, to be really honest. Most people, and I understand it, want to feel really safe in their communities. We've had people come to us and say, you know what, I can't do this work because it's just too much. I can't let it go when I go home. Well, the reality of it is, I often said to people, you're just as safe as you were yesterday. The only difference is now you know a bunch of stuff, but you're just as safe, right? But some people, that's a real challenge to kind of align what they are becoming aware of is happening in their community with, needing to feel safe, and feel safe for their families, and in all the ways it's really important to us. I think how to support staff in that context is really important. You can talk about things like, training and support. Compassion fatigue is a real, theme as well. You have trauma-informed practice. All the tools, supporting and training staff is always been and always will be an important part of the work in terms of kind of burnout and looking after one another. The other side of, not to make light of it, but, creating a culture of, built on passion, built on, I've often said that work is hard enough. You might as well have fun while you're doing it. Like, there is a real celebratory side of the work as well that does go to some degree against the challenges of the work itself. So that is important to highlight as well, in whatever context way that fits the organization that you're part of. I'll be really honest, one of my challenges, speaking of me personally from a burnout perspective, it hasn't been those pieces. I think when I've really struggled over a 25-year career, and it's happened occasionally, is that knowledge of having a better understanding of what the solutions are, and we're still not doing it. I find that really hard. I find it really challenging to have to re-educate folks all the time around what the right solutions are, and sometimes meet with people who, quite frankly, don't understand the context that I'm trying to share with them. So I think that's the closest I've come to burnout, is the constant pushing a big rock up a hill from a policy perspective, in trying to get the support that I know makes a massive difference in someone's life. I find that really hard. And certainly as my career's gone on, and I like to think I have a better understanding of what the solutions are now, and still to have to fight the fight every day, for me on a personal, that has been one of the tougher pieces I've had to work through. I tend to try and channel it from a perspective of a motivator, because I could let it really get to me at the same time. So developing, a healthy organizational culture, supporting staff. I think in lots of ways it also helps to feel part of a bigger collective across the country. It's very isolating work, whether you're a leader in an organization or a frontline staff person. Feeling a part of something bigger sometimes helps as well. That you're not alone in the work, because sometimes that can really exacerbate that feeling of being burnt out as well. That's a bit of a long-winded answer, bunch of things in there, but yeah, it's probably one of the tougher questions. When I saw the list, I was like, oh my goodness, how do I answer that one? That one's tough.
But it is true, because it is tough. It's an uphill climb, and especially I think in the nonprofit space, there's limited resources to solve some of the most challenging problems. So if you're constantly trying to create an environment to solve without the structure around you to do so, it does get to be a bit of an uphill climb.
Oh,
What
absolutely.
gives you hope, Sheldon?
I think the wins. I think I wrote somewhere in my notes that I have not looked at since we started chatting. The wins. I mean, the reality of it is there are substantial wins along the way, either at an individual level. We're about to open up 23 units of housing, some family units in there. Those are huge wins. One of the first things I did when I started the Raising Roof a little over a year and a half ago was had the privilege of going and opening up 3 units of affordable housing in Winnipeg. And first thing I saw when we did the grand opening was I think 12 or 15 youth trainees from Purpose Construction who helped build those 3 units. That is very rewarding. So I think making sure you don't, in the face of all the things that are a challenge and are not working the way they should, not losing sight of there are wins along the way at a client level, at an organizational level at the same time. I'm really excited about the submission to Build Canada Homes, because there's a whole pile of people, not just the number of units, but the whole pile of people now in 3 provinces who are like, look what we can do together. That's really exciting. It's really rewarding. And it's also very sustaining against the things that, yes, continue to be a challenge.
It's so cool to see the opportunity for partnering together. I think when Build Canada Homes first draft of their plan was released and I saw the 300 unit mark, there was a moment where I thought, oh, does this exclude nonprofit from participating in this solution? But actually, I think it does give us all the opportunity to think about how do we collaborate to achieve scale. And so it's really cool that that's what you're doing at Raising the Roof right now. And we are going to be wrapping up the show. So I do want to ask you before you go, for our listeners who are tuning in right now, if they want to help but don't know where to start, whether they're individuals, business owners, policymakers, organizational leaders, nonprofit, for-profit, wherever they are, what is one concrete action you think can make a real difference in the housing crisis right now?
I think get involved, take the time to understand from whatever perspective you need to, because affordable housing and safer communities works for everyone. That's undisputable. So no matter what angle you're coming at it from, take the time to get informed and then use your voice, either in terms of, getting involved locally, advocating, your vote matters, as they say, all of those things. Get informed, truly understand, the real solutions that we know are available to us. And then whatever action that comes from that, getting involved, like I said, either volunteering or otherwise, and making sure your voice is heard when it comes to the solutions that you would like to see brought to your community. I think that is probably the most tangible thing that I can say to folks.
That's incredible. Thank you so much, Sheldon, for joining us on the show today.
Always a pleasure, Emmy. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the fact that you guys do this show all the time. It makes a huge difference. So thank you for that as well.
And we appreciate your leadership in the community. And we're excited to hear the news of success, hopefully, on a 1,000-unit pipeline. So congrats. That's amazing.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Sheldon. Today's episode featured Sheldon Polett, Executive Director of Raising the Roof, whose decades of leadership offer valuable perspective on how Canada's housing and homelessness landscape has changed and where collective action is needed most. His insights highlight the importance of collaboration, sustained leadership, and practical action to address housing insecurity across communities. Thank you for listening to On the Way Home, a podcast brought to you by Blue Door. Stay tuned for more conversations with leaders working to build stronger housing systems across Canada.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.